Namaste friends, welcome to Learn with J, empowered by Magic Needles. This day I am here with yet another beautiful pattern which is named as FP Cluster V Pyramids. So you form the pyramids here with clusters and V stitches, and you have the front post also giving a texture to this particular pattern. This particular pattern is a repeat of rows 2 to 9, and to make this pattern we need to take multiples of 16 plus 3 chains as the foundation stitches. So I worked this particular sample with sky blue yarn, hobby store Aran 100% premium acrylic anti-pill with medium weight 4 and color code 2003. So I shall make the required number of chains and get back to you. As usual, I am using my 5.5 mm clover MR hook. I have made two multiples of 16 plus 3, 35 chains. To begin with, make a double crochet in the fourth chain from hook. 1, 2, 3, fourth chain from hook, and one double crochet in next two chains as well, in each of them, one in each. Now chain 2, skip 4, 1, 2, 3, 4, and in the next, that is the fifth from the last stitch, place 2 DC V stitch, 2 double crochets, chain 1 and 2 double crochets. This will appear as though the chain is being full, but it will get set once the pattern is completed. Okay. Chain 2 again, skip 4, 1, 2, 3, 4, place 1 DC in each of the next 7 chains. Four, five, 6 and 7, and again chain 2, skip 4 and 2 DCV in the next. 1, 2, 3, 4, chain 1 and 2 DCs. So in this pattern we have the clusters, front post clusters, DC front post clusters, and all varieties of stitches with DCs and front posts. So again chain 2, skip 4, 1, 2, 3, 4, and place 1 DC in each of the last 4 stitches. So this is row 1. Row 1 is not the repeat row. The pattern starts from row 2. I shall be back with row 2 now. Row 2, either chain 3 and turn, or turn and make a twisted standing double crochet in the very first stitch, DC in next stitch, and here our pattern begins. So DC front post cluster in the next 2 stitches. It's a cluster. Half incomplete DC, yarn over, front post, double crochet, yarn over, pull through all 3. Then chain 2, and here in chain 1 space make 3 DCs, chain 1 and 3 DCs. Chain 2. Now we are going to do front post DC and DC cluster. So yarn over, insert as you insert for the front post cluster under the DC, incomplete front post cluster, yarn over and one incomplete DC and complete the cluster, and one DC in each of the next 3 stitches. And then you are going to make DC front post cluster here, so incomplete DC in the next stitch, yarn over, front post cluster, incomplete first, and then yarn over, pull through all 3 loops of the hook. Chain 2. We have chain 1 space here. In the chain 1 space make 3 double crochets, chain 1, 3 double crochets, chain 2, again front post incomplete double crochet and double crochet cluster together, and 1 DC in each of the last 2 stitches. This completes our row 2, and this is the first repeat row in the pattern. This video is going to be a little big video, so I may convert it into 2 parts, but both will be released on the same day. So row 2 is complete now. Row 3, either chain 3 and turn or make a standing double crochet in the very first stitch, and then 1 minute, let me adjust the camera. You're going to make DC and front post double crochet cluster, incomplete DC and front post double crochet cluster, chain 2, skip chain 2 space and next DC and make 2 DC, chain 1, 2 DC all in the same stitch. Chain 1, skip DC, chain 1 DC and place 2 DC, chain 1, 2 DC all in the same stitch. To go over to the next block here in the pattern, chain 2 and make front post double crochet DC cluster over the next 2 stitches. So this is where the confusion might arise. You should be careful enough because we'll be having only 5 stitches here. 7 has reduced to 5 in the last row. Now place 1 DC in the next, and now DC front post double crochet. This is the cluster now. Okay, now chain 2 to go to the next block. You skip 2 chains, skip this DC, and in the next you place 2 double crochets, chain 1, 2 double double crochets. Now we are going to chain 1 and skip DC, chain 1 DC and place again 2 double crochets, chain 1, two double crochets. Now chain 2. Now make front post double crochet and DC cluster over the next 2 stitches. Place DC in the very last stitch here. This is how it will look at the end of row 3. I shall be back with row 4. For row 4, chain 3 and turn or make a DC in the very first stitch. Chain 2, skip the cluster, chain space and 2 DCs, and in the chain 1 space make 2 DC V stitch. Chain 1, jump to the next chain 1 space between the 2 DC V stitch and place 2 DC V stitch. Now chain 2, skip 2 DCs, chain space and 1 DC, and in the middle DC of this block make a front post double crochet. Chain 2, skip the next cluster, chain space and 2 DCs and make 2 DC V stitch. Chain 1, because we are working within this pyramid block, it is chain 1 spacing only. Skip the 2 DCs, chain 1 and 2 DCs, and in the chain 1 space work 2 DC, chain 1, 2 DC. Now chain 2 and place 1 DC in the very last stitch here. It might be the third chain of the turning chain or the top of the standing DC that you have made. This is how the pattern looks after row 4. I'll be back with row 5 now. For row 5, chain 3 and turn or make a double crochet in the very first stitch and make 2 more double crochets there. Chain 2, and here we are going to make 7 DCs between the 2 chain 1 spaces of the 2 DC V groups. So starting from the first chain 1 space of the first group, 1 DC in the chain 1, 1 DC on DC, 1 DC on DC, 1 DC on the chain 1 space, that is 4. Now 1 DC on DC 5, 1 DC on DC 6 and 1 DC in chain 1 space 7. So this is done. Now we have to jump over to the front post DC we did. To do that chain 2 and in this stitch make 2 DC V groups, 2 DC V stitch. then chain 2, DC in the first chain space between the 2 DC V stitch, 1 DC each in the next, 1 DC under the chain 1 space here, 1 DC in each of the next 2 DCs, and ending with a DC in the chain 1 space. Between the 2 chain 1 spaces of 2 groups of 2 DCV stitches, we are making 7 DCs. Now chain 2 and place 3 DCs in the very last stitch here. So that will be the third chain of the turning chain or the top of the standing DC that we made. This back pattern becomes a repeat of 2 to 9 rows just because we are staggering the pyramids here. So the pyramid has been formed here, the inverted pyramid here, and now it's going to get formed here. So this is formed here, here it's not going to form, it's going to form here. We are staggering the 7 DC groups also. So in the first part of the repeat rows we have it here, in the second part it is getting staggered. Okay, so I'll be back with row 6 now. For row 6, chain 3 and turn, which will be counting as 1 DC, or make a DC directly here in the very first stitch, and make 3 more DCs in the very first stitch. Chain 2. We will be jumping over to the 7 DC group here. So you have to make a front post double crochet and double crochet cluster in the first 2 stitches of the 7 group DCs, and then place 1 DC each on the next 3 stitches. And DC front post double crochet cluster over the next 2 stitches. Now chain 2 and jump over to the chain space of the DC V stitch, wherein you will make 3 DCs so we did that in row 2. Chain 1 and 3 DCs. Again chain 2, so make FPDC DC cluster over next 2 stitches, 1 DC in each of the next 3 DCs, and DC FPDC cluster over next 2 stitches. And we are going to make chain 2 and go over to the very last stitch or the third chain of the turning chain and place 4 double crochets there. So this is how the pattern looks after row 6. So I shall be back with row 7 in the next. I shall be back with row 7 now. Row 7, either chain 3 and turn or make a standing double crochet in the very first stitch. I'll be making the standing double crochet here. Now skip the next DC and place 2 DC V stitch in the next stitch, next DC. Now chain 2 and go over to the next cluster here, that is the group of DCs and clusters. There you're going to make FPDC, oh god, FPDC DC cluster over the next 2 stitches and place a DC in the next stitch. And now next it's going to be DC FPDC cluster. So in the ends you begin with FPDC DC cluster or DC FPDC cluster, end with DC FPDC cluster. Chain 2 again. Now we have the group of this 3 DC, chain 3 DC. There you skip the chain 2 space here, skip the DC, and in the middle DC of the 3 DCs place 2 DC V stitch. Chain 1, jump over to the middle DC of the 3 DCs here and place 2 DC V group. Chain 2. Again we come to the cluster and DC group. So to begin with we make a front post double crochet, the incomplete version, and a DC incomplete in the next, and complete the cluster and place 1 DC in the next chain, next DC. Now it's going to be DC front post double cluster. When you talk of clusters, we work stitches together. Now chain 2 and skip the next chain space, DC, and place, oh god, 1 minute, 2 DC V group here. And place a DC on the last stitch. So this is how it looks after row 7. I'll be back with row 8. So either chain 3 and turn or make a standing double crochet in the very first stitch here. And then make a 2 DC V stitch in the chain space contained by the 2 DC V stitch of the last row. Chain 2, and front post DC on the middle DC of the next post and DC group. After chaining 2, skip the 2 DCs, chain space and the cluster, and make a front post DC in the next stitch. Again chain 2, skip the next cluster, chain space and next 2 DCs and place 2 DC V groups. DC. So we have done the DC V group here. Now chain 1, skip the next 2 DC, chain space and 2 DC, and again in the chain 1 space contained in the 2DCV group, make 2DC, chain 1, 2DC group. Chain 2, skip next 2DC, chain space, a cluster, and make a front post DC in the next DC here, the center DC here. Chain 2, jump to the chain 1 space contained in the 2DCV group and make 2DCV group. And place a DC in the very last stitch here, or the third chain of the turning chain. This is how it looks after row 8. Okay, I'll be back with row 9 now. Chain 3 and turn, or make a standing DC. This is row number 9 that I'm going to work now. It's a very simple row. And place 1 DC each in the next 2 DCs and 1 DC in the chain 1 space. Now chain 2, and on the DC, that is the front post DC, make 2 DC V stitch. Rows 2 to 9 means it's not very difficult. It's actually repeat, like you're staggering the stitches, so the number of rows have increased, nothing else. It's a simple logic of working 2 DC V stitch over the single front post of the previous row. Again, chain 2 and place 2 DC V stitch, not 2 DC V stitch, sorry. So we're going to have 7 DC group here between the 2 single chains of 2 DCV groups. So DC here, DC on DC, DC on DC, DC and a chain 1 space, that completes 4 DC. Now DC on DC, this is 5th DC, DC on DC, 6th DC and DC in chain 1 space, 7th DCs. So you can see that this row, 9th row, is coming back to row 1. Okay, now chain 2, 2 DCV group in the post stitch, I like the pattern, so I took it up for the video. Now chain 2, 2 DCV stitch in chain 1 space. No, sorry, that's what happens. Okay, sorry. So chain 2, and then in chain 1 space of the 2 DCV group, 1 DC. See, we have 4 DCs here in the corner. So we should end up with 4 DCs in the other end also. 1 DC on DC, 1 DC on DC, 1 DC in the last stitch, or the third chain of the turning chain. This completes our row 9. And this is one complete pattern repeat. This is how it looks. So this is a sample piece which I had done. Excuse me. So thank you friends for patiently watching this video. It's quite a big video, I understand. Do subscribe to Magic Needles channel, and do use this pattern in one of your projects and get back to me in the comment section. And if you want the written pattern for this particular design or this pattern, you please get back to us either in Magic Needles site or in the comment section of the video, I shall get you the pattern. I shall send you the pattern in your email. Thanks once again, friends. Have a great day. I shall be back with yet another pattern in the next video. Bye for now.